in the right, make sure you're in the right room. We have a great sort of 3 sets of discussions today, so by the end of today you really will have had a comprehensive view. Probably one of the most important issues that needs to be discussed, and often one that is put over in a corner and treated as a sort of technical issue or a policy issue. Probably the single biggest unlock to Africa's trade potential. I mean, just bearing in mind at the moment that Africa still imports over 80% of its food. So huge opportunity given the Africa Free Trade Agreement for what this means for the continent in terms of freeing up free trade. Also absolutely critical if we start to look at, if we combine this in a broader sense with innovation, how this can be used to unlock innovation. I was just checking again last night in preparation for this. One example, one simple example is that electronic phytosanitary standard certificates common throughout the world. 148 countries are now using these. Only 10 countries, which surprised me when I checked again. I think that's, you know, I'm looking at Lucy here, who'll be on stage later on. You know, Kenya, Ivory Coast because of cocoa and to be able to trade cocoa. Only 10 countries are using these electronic phytosanitary standards. So, you know, that's just the gap that's there. And this is one simple innovation measure that would fully unlock. But then if you combine that with what this means in terms of, we talk about food security, but when we talk about food and nutrition security and looking at the integrated loss of this, if we talk about addressing climate change and the impact of what 30%, 40% or more in some countries post-harvest loss has on the role that this plays, you know, there is a huge ability to actually do something quite significant in this area. This is probably one of the single biggest low-hanging fruits that could have a massive impact on the continent. So I'll stop there. My name's Sean DeClean. I've just stepped down as part of the executive committee at the World Economic Forum. I spent 18 years of my life actually living in Africa. A lot of that working on food and agriculture, so I know this well. Mostly in southern and eastern Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, South Africa, but I've also spent a large amount of time in West Africa, so this is something that's passionate for me. I've been involved with the AGRF. I was one of the co-founders of the AGRF when this was first brought to Ghana under the late former head of the UN at the time. And so I think this is this is a very powerful platform for Africa, and so I hope you get a lot out of today's discussion. So on that basis, we're very honoured today to have Jenny Moffat, who's I just want to get the actual name right, Jenny, but the Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs at USDA. Maybe if I can invite you up onto the stage, and if you just take a seat here. So we have to use these. So you'll have to press the red button to. I do need my notes. So, I mean, as we were just saying, I mean, you yourself, just by way, when we were talking about it, you were actually a farmer. It'd be so you're not just coming at this from a sort of USDA bureaucracy perspective, but you actually farmed yourself. So this is something that you know something about intimately, because you were obviously heavily involved in the marketing side of what you did, even on the individual farm. But for you, I mean, how important is this issue?
Well, Yeah. So, as you mentioned, yeah, I come from, of course, a farming background. My family farms walnuts. I worked at the farm for about 10 years, and a lot of what I did was um, sales and international markets. And so I know firsthand when we were able to, thanks to the work of USDA, when we were able to access new markets and new countries, what that meant for the industry as a whole, what that meant for our ability to facilitate new trade, new markets. So overcoming SPS barriers is a game changer for industry, whether that is in the United States or whether that is here in Africa, that it allows more opportunity, more economic opportunity for farmers here to be able to find more and better markets and really be able to facilitate trade. You talked about nutrition security, and that is such an important part. But key to all of that is really making sure that the standards, that there are rules-based, that they're science-based, that they're risk-based, that there's transparency amongst all of our countries as we are working on facilitating trade. And that is a really key part of it all, and we talked a little bit about harmonization of standards as well, really understanding what we need to be able to bring products into the United States from African countries and vice versa, and within the African continent as well. So facilitating trade is really critical for food security, for nutrition security, for economic growth. I was on some panels at the Africa Climate Summit in the past couple days and heard over and over again about job development, women farmers, smallholder farmers, and the opportunities if we can facilitate some of these phytosanitary and sanitary issues that we have between our trading partners. So I think that is important. USDA has a very long history here in Africa helping to facilitate that. We have someone who's actually based with the African Union to support harmonization of trade as well as other SPS issues. We've got staff across the continent and many of the embassies working on facilitating trade. And we also have important partners who are doing exchange of information, whether that is exchange of information and research on how to maximize productivity and overcome many different issues that are happening on farms to increase production, but also to overcome sanitary, phytosanitary, and food safety issues that, of course, will not just help bolster the economy here in Africa, but also, and particularly for African farmers, but also for facilitating trade as well.
And so, I mean, the US is really, it's really led on a lot of this agenda. I think it sees it important. It's been a major player on the whole global food trade agenda. Some of the largest trading companies in the world are actually based in the US and that. But, I mean, what are some of the actions that the US has taken to really facilitate that whole safe trade and food products that you see are really key for Africa in that sense?
Well, I'm excited to be able to announce 2 new actions that USDA is taking, in addition to the actions that and the longstanding relationships that USDA has here in Africa. So we have 2 new initiatives that we are working on in partnership, very much a strong partnership with the African Union and for phytosanitary with the IPPC out of the United Nations Food and Ag Organization, as well as WOA. So the first one is an Africa Phytosanitary Initiative that the IPPC is leading. We know, and data shows us that crop losses due to plant and pest disease pre-harvest can be anywhere from 30 to 60%, 30 to 60% losses of product before you even get to harvest. And then there's post-harvest as well. So if we can address different plant and pest diseases here in Africa, that will help bolster production here in Africa. And so we're working, we've partnered with the IPPC, who is leading this effort. They're developing a train the trainer, so they will be training 11 countries' National Plant Protection Organization officers to be able to do things like surveillance, do things like monitoring, develop protocols and systems for phytosanitary so that we can really work on not just early surveillance, but also reducing different plant pest disease. So that's one thing. IPPC is doing a Train the Trainer later this month. 11 countries right now, and the plan that they have is to increase to all 54 countries by 2026.
Okay.
And then the next one is we're working with WOA, and we have invested, and we're happy to announce today that we're investing $17 million with the World Organization for Animal Health on building the animal health capacity infrastructure here in Africa as well. Early warning systems, the technology to be able to report those early warning systems, building that infrastructure. Not only will that support producers here in Africa to be able to maximize their production, but also to help facilitate trade as well.
No, exciting. Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that the fact that you're sort of really leaning in as USDA on this and those kinds of partnerships, what I liked about that, and you answered my question even before I got there, was, okay, you're starting with 11, but you've got an aggressive plan to say, okay, how do we take this continent-wide?
Yeah.
And so I was really excited by the sort of 2026 target, because I think this is the piece of it that's going to be critical. If we don't hold ourselves accountable to aggressively scale up some of these initiatives, and that's what's exciting about what you're saying.
Yeah, and I love it because it's a train the trainer model, which means that we're really building the infrastructure, the human capacity infrastructure. We're training folks who are then going to go back to their countries and train more people. So it's just this huge snowball effect of building the capacity and the technical ability to be able to do all these different things we need to do on phytosanitary.
And on the innovation front, I mean, you know, the galvanizing that whole linking this to really scaling up the innovation ecosystem around this in Africa to bring this together. I mean, this is something, this whole idea that the US has been pushing with climate change around innovation sprints and all of this, but that's very exciting as well as to how do we really build those innovation ecosystems around food safety, phytosanitary standards, pre-post-harvest loss.
Absolutely, yes. So as you mentioned, we have the Aim for Climate that was announced at the previous COP, and we have been working now. We have over 500 partners, and that is government partners, that is NGO partners, that is industry partners, and you mentioned the innovation sprints. And those are such an important part, and we have many innovation sprints going on here in Africa, and how important that is. And then just this morning, I was at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture to see the work that they're doing with investments that U.S. government has made, as well as their own innovation, addressing different issues that farmers have, and that the food industry here has, whether it is in Tanzania or across Africa, dealing with aflatoxin. That is, certainly a food safety issue that they're working diligently to address and have really incredible solutions that are farmer focused. They're really thinking about how do we not just find the solutions, but make sure that smallholder farmers, women farmers, youth farmers, all of the great farmers that are being brought into the fold here are able to adopt easily and then get compensated for that too. So making sure that there's a system in place so that we have an incentive to do these different practices. Learning about cassava and some of the viruses that are affecting cassava and what that means for production, and how we can really bring in tools, whether that is AI tools or other tools, to really start to better understand, and so we can detect when it's in our field easily through a phone app they showed us, and then to be able to mitigate the damages and also hopefully reduce the scope of the virus as well.
No, and I like that last point in the sense of often technology solutions are seen as sort of high-end, expensive, and so the whole idea of, right, how can you just bring what is very sophisticated, often technology behind the scenes, down into something very tangible, very practical, that really works in the local context. And you're talking about applied phone apps and things like that, where you can take a photo of the plant, get the feedback as a farmer straight away.
It's incredible, yeah. And they were showing us the soil testing kits that they have that are basically like a tackle box that you can bring out to the field, an extension agent can bring out to the field, they can test the soil, because healthy soil will also help reduce the impacts of viruses as well.
No, it's exciting, and I mean, I think it's that, you know, and I suppose the final thing that I'd then like to ask is that this is going to require, well, the challenge is this has often been dealt in a very siloed way. So you have policymakers sitting over here with technical officials, you know, working on sort of standards and technical frameworks. But in your view, you know, what's it going to require in terms of breaking those silos, in terms of the sort of innovative, you know, we're going to need to sort of, you know, in a way create a revolution in the type of partnership models that we're seeing to make this work. What's your sense on how important that whole integrated partnership approach is?
It's critical. I mean, coming from farming, and you know, I learned deep down from my dad that everything that we do is a systems approach. Whether it is on the farm, taking a systems approach to how we farm and how we're managing all the different critical components on the farm, or whether it's in policy making and breaking down those silos, because it is a system, and farmers need to be able to have access to the whole system and not know all the different silos and not all of the machine that is behind, whether that is USDA or other governments. So I think it is critical to really be able to do that we come together and talk about what are the farmers' needs on the ground. How does research respond to those needs? How do we make sure that research is then back translated to farmers and ranchers? And of course, in an integrated approach is the most important part of making that all happen.
I love the way that systems thinking has just become sort of accepted. You know, a few years ago, you talked about food systems and people just looked at you blankly. Now I can actually have a conversation with a whole range of people, and they're talking about systems. I mean, Jenny, just before you leave, I mean, any sort of advice, questions for the panels that are coming up? I mean, you know, in terms of what we really, as a leadership group, what do we need to think about?
Well, I'm curious. We're doing things at the United States, and I've been on panels where I've been learning from other governments, and what's happening is this cross-exchange and facilitation of information. And how do we do this, not just between the layers of, you know, the different layers between government and research and applied research and farmers and ranchers, but also across the sectors, across researchers, across governments. How do we even facilitate more exchange so that all of the great ideas that I'm hearing can be shared to even more people? So that's what I'm really encouraged about is how do we cross-share these platforms? And I think this forum is certainly a great opportunity for that.
No, brilliant. And I love the fact that we've now got a packed room.
Yeah.
Often when I've done this, been on this topic before, you've had 25 people over in a little side room sort of huddled together. So the fact that we've filled nearly all of the seats in this Kilimanjaro hall, you know, sort of is a test to that. Jenny Moffat, thank you. And I love just the down-to-earthness that you bring to this as a very senior official within USDA, but also that you can tell that whole farming background and you know, part of a farming community just shining through. But thank you, really, you know, really inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that's given us a lovely sort of way of kickstarting this. Maybe if I can just invite the first panel up, you know, Watipaso Makandawiri, Peace Matua, Johnson Kiragu, Candida Shirima, and Lucy Coleman. Take a seat. So, once again, a great group. So we've, you know, this to just build, and now to really get into some of the details. You know, so we have a really good mixture here. You know, so Wati is the regional food markets advisor for the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, from the British government. And Peace Matua is the sort of knowledge manager from PACA. So, you know, very important role that PACA plays. Johnson Kiragu is the East Africa Regional Director for Partners in Food Solutions. So we were just talking about partnership and how important that is. And then Candida Shirima is the Director of Compliance and Enforcement at the Tanzania Bureau of of standards. So welcome. It's great having someone, with particularly given we're in Tanzania, who has that. And last but not least is Lucy Coleman, who's the CEO of the Warehouse Receipt Systems Council based in Kenya. And so as you can see, quite a strong, diverse group. I'm going to create a bit of a conversation here. We're not just going to do a series of talk at you in the sense of have a series of lectures. And so I'm going to move backwards and forwards a little bit before you. But maybe Johnson, if I just start with you. I mean, actually, the last point that was being made by the Undersecretary, sort of around partnerships, and is absolutely key in terms of what is the role that that these different players can play, and the criticality if we're going to unblock this in an integrated way and not just see it in a very siloed way. How important is that partnership aspect in doing this? And I'll come back to you with some other questions, but just starting with that, the criticality of that integrated approach and unpacking that.
Thanks, Sean. And I think you're spot on, and the Undersecretary was spot on as well. I think mentioning in your opening statement that food safety is not just about preventing people from getting sick. It's broader than that. It's about trade, it's about livelihoods, it's about social mobility, it's about cooperation and growth, and economic growth. And when you look at that from that lens, you start to appreciate that we must have all hands on deck. So everybody, starting from the input suppliers. The other secretary just mentioned about what the role of the health of the soils have at the end of the day in terms of the safety of the products or the produce. You also appreciate the role that the farmer plays. You appreciate the role that the processor plays. And the thing is, when we talk about the partnerships, especially the term that's been used for many years is PPPs. And it elicits some sort of humongous arrangements. The PPPs that we know of traditionally are the ones that the private sector and government get into when they're looking at huge infrastructural projects, building roads, building bridges, building hospitals. And the other aspect that you brought earlier, which I liked, is innovation. So we need to be innovative with the PPPs that we design. And we need to be creative so that we're not scaring people away. I'll describe a PPP that we have as partners in Food Solutions that brings together players from all areas of the system. So Partners in Food Solutions have been in operation for about 15 years. We were founded by General Mills, which is a huge food processing company. And General Mills, back in 2008, started encouraging their staff, their employees, to provide pro bono consulting, a few hours in a month, to food processors in Africa. It worked really well. Fast forward 15 years after that, we now have Cargill that does the same. We have DSM, now DSM Firmenich, that does the same. We have Beulah, we have Arden Mills, we have Hershey, we have JM Smucker. So 7 corporates, and among these 7 corporates, they have 800 years of experience in food processing. So what happens is we identify companies here in Africa, and then match them. We have a database of 1,400, about 1,400 experts in our database. So we match them to help these companies solve the problems. The problems that we solve are not only in food safety and quality, but one thing that we have come to learn over the years is about 40% of the challenges that are facing food companies are quality and food safety related. Looking at
So
now
nearly half of all
Half
of,
of the
all
challenges
of the challenges are
food
sort of
safety
food
related.
safety.
Talking about now the public piece, so our work has been funded publicly by different agencies. And then coming to the ground, the way we have crowded in the other public aspect of the PPP is we work with the government ministries. For example, in Tanzania here, we would work with the TFDA so that any knowledge that we are developing is then being channeled to the food industry through the TFDA. We have also worked very closely with, you mentioned, Sean, research. We've worked very closely with the universities and other research institutions to basically crowd in all the, you know, the critical ingredients that will be required to drive the food industry forward. So by and large, there are challenges in food safety. Food safety is not just about, you know, preventing people from getting ill. We can become creative. And I should mention as I end, we have also brought in financial institutions because you can have the best knowledge, but if that processor that you're trying to help doesn't have the financial wherewithal to buy that piece of equipment or to ensure that they're testing the raw materials as they come in, then you don't move. So we work in that way, crowding in, and that in my view, speaks very well to a systems lens, so
Great.
partnerships and a systems lens.
So I'll come back to you, Johnson, but I think what you've done there is just very nicely framed the fact that this requires an integrated approach. That you have, it needs a significant sort of, you know, thinking on public-private partnerships, how, because at the end of the day, I mean, that half the problems that you were seeing by private food companies, nearly half, 40%, are, you know, food safety related. So from a private sector standpoint, obviously from a government perspective, you know, there's a critical sort of issue. But it requires, you know, at the end there you were talking about how do you bring finance institutions into this, the role of innovation. So taking that whole approach, but also then looking at this in terms of nutrition and environment and all of that. So, Wadipaso, maybe if I just, you know, came to you just to sort of frame from an international organization's perspective, then, you know, how important is it that we really actually double down and focus on this issue and the role that needs to be played, given also particularly from, you know, from where I see it, the introduction of the Africa Free Trade Agreement and what is going to be needed to unlock that. 80% of that trade is going to be food in the initial instance. And so the importance of this role, not just to address the issue itself, but to unlock the whole bigger agenda that is sort of Africa free trade.
Thank you so much for the question. And just to echo what Johnson was saying, I think even from the international regional perspective, the issue of partnership comes in a lot on the food safety regulation issues. And I can tell a little bit of my own experience in terms of how food safety will affect, like AFCTA, the trade. As you rightly pointed out, that food trade will be a major issue when it comes to the success of AFCTA. Now, you find that when you're trying to push the agenda of food trade, one of the critical issue has been in terms of, one, from the producer side, the compliance of what is required to cross the border. Now, all the institutions that operate in promoting trade operate in silos. And if for somebody who is trying to export food across the border, he has to go through customs authorities. In certain countries, you have to go through roadblocks if your food is going through trucks. And you find this absence of knowledge in terms of why certain certification has to be done, or what is important for that food to cross the borders. So I was going to give an example of somebody who called me frantic just a couple of weeks ago. They're trying to export their food across the border. And they are stopped by the customs that this cannot go past the border because your papers are not meeting their requirements. But they force that trader to offload the product. Now, this is a seed which is crossing the border. It has already been checked with compliance, and no one knows about contamination that will happen if you take off the food. It means on the other side, that food is not going to be acceptable because of the contamination. So the point that I'm trying to say is that food safety regulations, especially from the international perspective, there's a major role that we can play and which we are playing in order to try to share some of the best practices, for example, share some of the learning, because in some of the, in the other side of the world, there's been a lot of experience in trying to enforce and ensure that food safety regulations are adhered to. So one is about sharing the lessons and experiences. Secondly is the capacity building to support the ecosystem approach that he talked about. Because of the lack of ecosystem approach, we find that when we work in a number of countries where we're trying to support them to food trade and to comply with the standards, most of the institutions are still operating in a silo. So our role has been to assist in the capacity building of the institutions to try to work in a partnership mode.
To break the silos.
Exactly.
This theme that's emerging at the moment is sort of how do you break the silos?
Exactly the point.
I like that when we're talking about this because you have silos of grain and so we're also, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so I think ultimately one of the issues also that we found out as a role of international organizations is that most of us, although we will blame the institutions in the countries that operate in silo, we've been operating in silos as well. And from FCDO perspective, that's why we've been working with AGRA to try to create a partnership amongst what we call the PIATA partnership, which is a partnership for inclusive agriculture transformation. The reason we're doing that was there's no coherence in the work that we're doing. So sometimes we're operating to build capacity or to invest in building the infrastructure for food safety regulations, but we're all either we're operating in the opposite direction or we're duplicating the same things that are being done. There was no scaling of support that was going on in our programs. So under the PIATA partnership, we've started finding ourselves working together as partners, FCDO and USAID and Gates Foundation, pulling the resources together to try to ensure that there is impact. Because unless there's impact, it's very difficult to see the behavioral change of the ecosystem in terms of how they should approach the food safety regulations. So
Can I just ask on that, which is exciting, this sort of PIATA approach where you bring in a number of development agencies, foundations, organizations like AGRA. Sorry, that's actually me. As the moderator, you should, you tell everyone to turn their phone who ends up having your phone on. But one of the things that Under-Secretary Jenny Moffat was saying, which I was really impressed by, and you heard me pick up on it, is holding ourselves accountable to going to scale. And how important is that at the moment, rather than, to really take some of these agendas. They were talking about working in 11 countries initially by 2026, trying to look at this, across Africa. How important is it to really hold ourselves accountable to a timeline to go to scale on this?
It's very important, I think, to hold ourselves accountable. One of the issues that you find is here you're dealing with private sector response to what we're doing. And if you are to move the private sector to be able to play their role in terms of producing and trading and marketing, it means institutions that work in that ecosystem have to hold themselves accountable. And accountability means that you are working towards not only scaling, but keeping to your promises in terms of what you're trying to do, being genuinely honest in terms of what can be done and what cannot be done, and playing your role in terms of what you said you're going to do. And this is exactly the point that was raised this morning. We should hold ourselves accountable, and we should play our role as partners, not as teachers who are trying to...
Brilliant. Okay, I'll come back to you, what's Mouser. But I mean, you know, Lucy, I mean, just listening to this, I mean, I'm going to push this point. But, you know, is enough being done? You know, you're coming at it from the sort of warehouse receipt system council side of things. I mean, obviously warehousing, warehouse receipts, scale becomes absolutely critical here. I remember talking when I set up warehouse receipting in Malawi about 20 years ago. And it was trying to get people to understand that actually, if you didn't have, at that time, it was about 100,000 tonnes, you know, moving through, that this was not going to be at scale. And these, you know, yes, you could have feeder warehouses, but you actually needed to get to scale. Which then, but how important, you know, for that private sector piece that Watty's talking about, how important is that, you know, and to get that regulation framework right to go to scale for warehouse, you know, development in Africa?
Thank you. I think I would like to start from the suggestion that you said that we need to break down the silos, because this space...
So this is becoming the theme
Yes,
today,
we
breaking the
break down
silos.
the
We are going to
silos,
break
yeah.
the silos, okay.
Because
Yeah.
there's space for private sector, there's space for government, and there's space for partners. We, as government, we provide an enabling environment for the private sector. And I think, if you allow me, I just want to give an example for what is happening with the farmers.
Just move the microphone a little bit closer. Yeah.
Is that better?
Much better.
Oh, okay, thank you. So we are talking about food systems, we are talking about SPS in the countries that have implemented, and let's start from the farmer. Because if we do not set standards and guidelines from the farmer aggregation or the farmer level where we pick this food, these commodities, for large-scale farmers, it might be a bit different, because they understand the quality of seed that they are supposed to plant. They understand the quality, how to sort, how to grade. But now we are looking at fragmented land ownership in Kenya, and we have to aggregate. So for example, in Kenya, we have to aggregate from the village level. So if we don't take the information, I know we have very good policies, we have very good guidelines that we've done and standards. But if we do not cascade it down to the farmer, then the food that we will get at the end of the day will not be the quality standards that we want to benchmark with international standards. So the example that I have, for example, we are working with farmers very closely. There's a farmer group in a place called Mauka in Nakuru, in Kenya. When the farmers were harvesting, these farmers had not been facilitated in terms of sensitized to understand how to sort. And the crop they are harvesting was maize. So basic things like just sorting and making sure that you have the clean maize separated from what is diseased, what is rotten, and so they end up shelling this maize together and then take it to the market. What happens when you take it to the market? You apply the standards that has been developed, and so they don't meet the standards. You reject. Where does that go to?
Which is heartbreaking if you're a smallholder farmer.
Exactly.
And you're doing this to pay your kids'
So
school fees.
you are talking about post-harvest losses of 30%. Let's take the lowest, 30%. You have produced maybe 20 bags, and you're already losing 6 bags from that 20 bags. So 6 bags for a farmer, and it is good for us to do the math. Sometimes I think as leaders, we don't sit to do the small math that the farmer is losing, and then we go and do the math for the global loss. So can we start and bring it down to that level? We have, when we're talking about SPS, we're talking about the SPS for human, talking SPS for animal, talking SPS for plant. In Nairobi right now, we have the summit. and we're looking at the climate summit. And if we don't pick it up from that level. So as we work with the farmers and separate it, then they have the clean maize, the farmer would say, now these ones that I've sorted and I've put it aside, what do I do with it? How do we dispose it? So how do we handle that? So that now from the village aggregation center, it comes to an aggregation center, so that by the time now you're trading with that commodity, then now you have a quality commodity to trade. So we need to start from the seed, the post-harvest management. We also need to know to structure these systems. Some of the commercial products like tea, coffee, they have a beautiful structured system. But what happens to the small-scale commodities like the maize, the beans, the pulses? What happens to that? Yeah. So the partnership, the collaboration between the government, ensuring that we have an enabling environment. We have these guidelines. We have the laws that support the same implementation and of these standards. The partnership with the partners and now private sector. In Kenya, we are trying to implement the warehouse receipt system, and we do not have enough quality storage facilities. So there's a space for investment in terms of storage facilities. There's also space.
And how much, can I ask you, Lucy, how much for that investment, if we take crowding in investment into African agriculture, how much of that investment that goes into storage facilities is hindered by people perceived risk around these issues of food safety, and is it a big part?
It's quite a big part, because before we get, I think I'm a proponent for standards. If we don't get the standards correct, then we will continue losing and not getting the correct investment. And also we need to build the infrastructure. And I think I was discussing with someone on what India did to make this happen. The government put their skin in the game, and they mandated the banks to at least invest 20% in warehouse infrastructure before they are given any other. So it is mandated that they put it, you, as a government, you need to put your skin in the game before you bring in other investors, so that they see that this investment is viable. Thank you.
No, very important. It's interesting. I mean, a couple of you have landed on the link to this at the end of what you've been saying. You've actually been landing on the link. Johnson did it. You just did it on finance. That obviously there's a critical link to the whole financing situation linked to this. I'm going to come to Tanzania in a minute, just to sort of, from a Tanzania side. But piece, I mean, the knowledge piece here, comes out so importantly. I mean, is there a way in which we can, really start to accelerate that knowledge and understanding from a full systems perspective? And just maybe if you also for us unpack, from Paca's side, where you see the critical issues. Is one of them?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean, for the question. Indeed, like the previous speaker has mentioned, the issue of evidence-based approaches to, innovate, get up good ideas, and so on. But we also want to look at how we can use evidence to come up with policies that have evidence-based. So again, with a knowledge gap that is within our systems, it's very important that we focus on tracking the implementation of these frameworks that have been put in place, strategies that have been put in place. At the African Union level, we have the CAADP biannual review mechanism, which is also a process of having member states collect data and evidence on how far they are implementing these standards, how they have adopted these international standards, because many questions we ask ourselves: why are African countries far behind other countries in terms of adopting these food safety and the incorporation of tracking and reporting? It will guide us or guide the formulation of decisions and policies that are evidence-based, and also to be accountable, to hold our member states accountable. Why aren't these systems working as we speak of promoting that intra-Africa trade? So how can we be at the level where we can trade together? How can we harmonize our standards and be at the same level to promote and boost this intra-African trade as one of the commitments that has already been made by our member states? So here, evidence generation, data generation, and knowledge is very key to promote the intra-Africa trade, as well as to ensure that systems, SPS systems are developed by countries at the same level. Thank you.
No, brilliant. And I'm going to come back to you on that. But Wati, just jumping back to you, I mean, this piece around data is just, I've been involved with several sessions in the last, yesterday. Not working. Do you have another handheld mic that I can use up the back? So this piece around data, to be able to make strong evidence-based decision-making is becoming absolutely critical. It's come out at several sessions over the last 2 days. How much is there enough emphasis being placed on really accelerating these data systems to allow us to make the kind of informed decisions? I say that because actually one of the best examples, and I'll use Kenya as an example, I saw during COVID was them creating a data war room because they were trying to address COVID, they were trying to address floods that were happening in parts of Kenya at the time, but they were also trying to address major issues to do with fall armyworm and locusts, all hitting at the same time. And then there were issues to do with sort of phytosanitary standards because of moisture, because of the floods. And what was interesting was Kenya said, right, we can't do this in data silos. We have to pull this together. And they created what they call a data war room to address this, to bring all the different data together. And even though it was an early example, it was very powerful to sort of see that firsthand.
Yeah, you're very right. This has been said over and over again in the last 2 days here. There was an interesting conversation where the conclusion was data is king, has become king, and it's the way to go. And from FCDO perspective, that's one of the entry points, and we're happy that African institutions have taken this very seriously. At the moment, as you may know, Sean, that we are working with our PIATA partners to support COMESA, who are putting up a regional food balance sheet. That was the entry point. I think 6 countries now are involved: Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda, looking at three value chains: maize, rice, and beans, to start collecting data on production, on stocks, on prices, on so many other things. I think the regional balance sheet will evolve and develop as we go around. The whole idea of that regional food balance sheet is because most of the decisions have been knee-jerk reaction, sometimes not out of just doing it for interest, but because there's no data.
And the food balance sheet, will it address issues around food safety concerns, or is it mostly just on production quotas?
It has to be organic in terms of what should be contained. I think initially what started was what is the data available, and you have to build on it. But I think that would be one of the crucial things, because if trade is not just about stock being available, but stock being available, which tells you about the food safety, whether there is it's aflatoxin free and etc. That is the data that has to be collected. But there has to be a start to have that culture of ensuring that data is available and it is manipulated and managed to create information that will be vital both for policymakers as well as private sector. And I think I was in Uganda a couple of months ago regarding looking at the food safety and in terms of what information is collected after those that are aggregating and those that are able to pass on that means. There's not much data collected, or if it's collected, it's stored and not manipulated to suit the users, how users are going to use that data. And we are trying to work with AGRA in terms of strengthening that ability of that data to be collected and to be put in good use.
And peace, I mean, you know, do you think is this something that's moving quick enough? Or do you think that we can actually really accelerate this sort of data capture? And what do you see as the bottleneck?
Yes, well, to start with a bottleneck, as I think, like you said, strengthening data systems as a country is very key. But one step that we have gone ahead to do is to incorporate the SPS index within the CADEF BR. So within this index, you are able to track or collect data on food safety related parameters, also on animal health and plant health. So it's a composite index that we are already in the process of validating the data that has been collected so far from some member states, and by the end of this year, we'll be presenting it to the African Union policy organs for consideration. So it is actually important for us to look at the data systems at the country level and see how we can build capacities to strengthen those data systems, but also importantly is to also build capacity at the country level for experts, experts to identify various system sources for this data to be able to capture the right and quality data for us to monitor. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that last piece is so important around how do we build the innovative ecosystems that can address this integrated approach that you're describing across the private sector and government. So Candida, I'm going to come to you now from the Tanzania perspective. Because obviously, I mean, the scale at which, Tanzania, this becomes a really big issue because, obviously, so this is an area that Tanzania is focusing on a lot. What are the key policy frameworks and what are the key actions that you're seeing in Tanzania that are being done to unlock this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'd like to say that Tanzania is also very much focused in ensuring food safety at all value chain levels, and recognize its importance in food security, nutrition, in health, as well as in economy. But all in all, on government perspective, the food safety is controlled based on the established infrastructures, policies, regulations, standards, and the procedures. And these legal frameworks are developed not only by the government itself, but also by engaging the relevant players or stakeholders who have a significant role to play in ensuring the food safety. So as that, the system or the available legal framework address the issues around or across all the levels from primary production. So we have ministries or institutions who works at primary production level to ensure food safety, and the other acts or laws and regulations which are addressed or which are implemented to ensure the safety across the value chain.
And what do you see as the key challenges then for you in Tanzania to really improve this quickly?
One of the key challenges which has been noted is the climate issues. We have seen that because of the changes in climate, there has been emerged plant diseases which require application of pesticides for protection of plant health and the control of diseases, and this will have impact on food safety because the pesticides which are applied in control of the pests or the other plant diseases may remain in the final food product as residues and complicate the food safety interventions, especially in agricultural food produce, but also the animal diseases, emerging animal diseases, which really require also treatment of animals, and that may lead into the residues of veterinary drugs and complement that.
I mean, I think it's very powerful because it's coming through consistently that we have to take, and it's something I'll push the next panel on, but they know this, is around, this thinking out of the box a little bit. I mean, climate change, your point, when I ask you, what is one of the biggest challenges to this, and you said climate change because it's going to change the disease vector. Particularly, and how that affects crops, which is so important from a knowledge-based perspective, because farmers aren't used to having certain diseases and certain crops, but as climate change comes in, it's going to affect these crops significantly, and so the adaptation to what is coming. I want to, okay, you've already got a microphone, well done, right. So quick question, and I will cut you off if you're too long, so
Thank you.
Introduce yourself, sir.
Thank you. I'm Marcos Albani from Tanzania Cassava Producers and Processors Association. My quick question would be, among all the challenges that panelists have identified, what if we breach the borders between our small patches of land in Africa, we call the nations? What if all those challenges we are talking about, if we decide that there could be no regulatory demarcations between nations in Africa? Thank you.
Okay, so someone's got their hand up the back there, so if we can get actually what I'm going to do is hold the microphone. I'm going to run up to a couple of people, so I'm going up to the gentleman up here. Okay, right, quick question. Introduce yourself. I'll hold the microphone so you can't keep it.
Okay, Maulid Mwatala from Sokoine University of Agriculture. It's a follow-up to what he said because we have multiple protocols for phytosanitary. You have East African Community, you have SADC, you have COMESA, you have PTA, you have all these things within Africa. And we need to harmonize, as I was saying, we can't have all these patches. That is one. The other thing is, what is your comment about strengthening the surveillance system? Because we are so much prone to inversions. Fall armyworm this year, cassava mealbug next year, fruit flies, everything.
Brilliant.
Into Africa.
Thank you. Great. So a great follow-up question. So we're getting there in terms of the cross-border regional trade. How do we make this, how do we create the uniform, the surveillance systems? You can hold your mic. Otherwise they hold it. Right, stand up, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Prudence Rugendo. I'm working with Sagot Center. Maybe we can hear from...
Can I just say SAGCOT is the southern, or now the Sustainable Agricultural Growth Corridors of Tanzania. So corridors become absolutely critical in this conversation. So,
yeah, one of the contributing factor for the country where food safety is being implemented effectively is having strong cooperative society. Now, maybe from the panelists, they can say something about how African countries can have strong cooperative society, strong consumer society. Thank you.
Consumer society. Okay, so creating the full link right through to the consumer. How important is the consumer? I'm going to take two more. I need, okay, two. You're lucky because I'm going to gender balance this. So the two women who have up their hand. So the other gentleman.
Thank you. Anna Minja, I'm working for AgriConnect project. So my concern is specifically on food safety and regulations, specifically on certifications. So the way these certifications program and regulations they have been run, it's like it's a business that doesn't, I like the way the gentleman said that it's a hidden business. So I can give a reference. I was talking to one of the staff from one of the certification companies, and he told me that it's so difficult to have technical staff who are full aware of how to do the certification and how to follow the regulation. So it's difficult for farmers and so on. So from what I was hearing, it's not difficult. It has been made difficult on purpose. It's business. People are trying to hold that so that they can keep that business.
Okay, so business is the block here in a way.
Yes, they are trying
so I like
to keep.
that.
So how about trying to franchise this certification process and infrastructures, because we want to export, we want to do
I'm
food
going
trade.
I'm going to stop you there, just because I've got to get back to them. But it's brilliant. I like the way. How do we simplify?
Just 1 minute,
one-
please.
one-
1 minute.
20 seconds.
And okay, 20 seconds. And have this certification. Different regions, at least different regions, have several food safety labs. We don't have to export to Kenya or to South Africa to do a certain test. We can do it here in Tanzania if we establish those things, establish those infrastructures, and capacity building our staff and our technical people, and lower the
I'm going to stop you. I love the passion. I love the passion. Okay, so professionalizing the services. You got a lot. Last one. So I'm going to hold the microphone. I learned my lesson, but in a good way. In a good way.
I'll behave. Okay, Louisa Barmy, Natural Sciences Institute, University of Greenwich. Very quick question. Very few African countries have a dedicated budget for food safety, compliance, and so on. How do we move forward on that? Because it was within the Malabo Agreement, for example, but I don't see it.
So how do we place resources in this? Okay, so we've heard about harmonization. We've heard about professionalizing services. We've heard about the kind of taking this right through, bringing the consumer in from the beginning. We've heard about the sort of forward, sensing of this, and how do we resource this? Okay, you've all got 1 minute now just to give your final comments, but also to wrap up. So quick words. So I started with the men last time, so I'll start with the women this time. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you. I think I'll try and address the question for franchising or privatizing certification. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll try and start with that passionate question, and I really like the question that you've asked. And when governments they are coming up with these regulations and certification guidelines, it should be inclusive in terms of stakeholder involved. And when you talk about franchising or privatizing, I think once we have those regulations and guidelines, we should be able to have private partners implement those standards. In terms of the question that is talking about, you are in Tanzania, you want to export to South Africa. I think we are already looking into harmonized standards through SPS, and the standards might not be harmonized and they might not be exactly the same, because a pest or a disease that is in Kenya might not be the same that is in Ghana because of the ecological conditions. But once if the standards are harmonized and we are all agreeing that these are the standards in terms of the commodity, we should be able to have not only in Africa, but just the world over. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I hope we're not just looking into harmonization, we're really actioning that harmonization. But I think that last point is so critical that it has to be, there's generic frameworks that we can use, but it has to be adapted to local standards. Peace. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, to respond to the question of harmonization, we have an SPS sanitary and phytosanitary framework for Africa that emphasizes harmonization of standards and regulations at regional level. So we encourage our member states or countries to adapt or domesticate this framework and make sure that standards are harmonized across the region. Secondly, the issue of reference laboratory. At the AU, we have a decision to establish an African reference, or rather African Union Food Safety Agency, under which we will have the coordination as well as a reference laboratory for Africa. So the issue of testing and certification may be addressed under that. This is still under, the decision is there, but the process of establishing it is still underway. So I think that's what I can say.
Yeah, and that last point is so critical. It does worry me that we have an Africa coordinated space agency sort of thing, and we haven't got an Africa food agency. So I'm so glad that you made that point, because it's so important. Candida.
Yeah, regarding the harmonization of cross-border regulations, I think this is, the regulations are based on the country setups. So each country and region has its own set of way of regulating this product. But all in all, under the EAC countries, the food standards, most of the food standards have been harmonized in order to facilitate these cross-border issues under the SPS. Mm-hmm. But also certification procedures. The certification procedures or scheme adopted in the country, in most of the developing countries, are based on the Tier 5 scale, which is really the one which tolerates most of the issues.
And to the gentleman's question, surveillance.
Yeah.
Sort of like, surveillance warning and that sort of thing. Is that something that you're starting to also start to really focus on?
Yes, that is also important, but also all these are implemented based on the international, the Codex Alimentarius standards, guidelines, and the recommendations, which guides the countries on implementation of these regulatory functions. So it's up to the countries now to consider and see how best can they harmonize.
And as you were saying earlier, it's also how do you hold each other as countries, say in the East Africa bloc or the West Africa bloc, how do you hold each other accountable to, Watipasu, to you, obviously there was a question on resourcing, which I like. How do we really get the kind of focus and resourcing into this as well? But you can answer and give your sort of concluding comments as well.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, John. 3 quick points. One is on certification. Good news. One of the issues is not that standards are not available. Like East Africa has grain standards. The issue is how the certification that is done, how is it recognized across the border? You saw what export bans that were happening in the last couple of months. We are supporting a program in COMESA which is called Mutual Recognition Agreements, where certification agencies will recognize each other's protocols. And this is very important because what's happening is even if your lab give a certificate, it will not be accepted across the border because you don't have a mutual recognition agreement on a bilateral basis. We're working with 6 countries at the moment, and about four value chains for that recognition. It's in process, and we're hoping the first one should be the Kenya-Uganda to have that mutual recognition agreement. I think it's a very important, that's the implementation.
I think it will make Lucy very happy if you can actually, I can see her smiling. Just a
quick, the other thing on food safety that we should all recognize is that we're still struggling to find incentives for producers to produce safe food. When somebody talked about the budget for food, when I was in Uganda, I was taught there's so much informal trade. I don't have to invest in food safety because off-takers are going to take it anyway. They don't come and test it, they take everything and they are able to find a market for it. Only those that are going through formal channels where the certification is very important are the ones who are investing. So what's the incentive for a farmer to invest all those resources, which will be a little bit costly to be able to
And
produce
this incentive point is so key, because for the very passionate plea of the lady who I the speech away from, it's if those incentives, if we don't get those incentives moving, then you get these disincentive mechanisms where people fill the void, as you were saying, by actually creating business to slow the process down. And so you need to professionalize those services and incentivize that in a way. Final word, Johnson, over to you, just in, and how do we professionalize, this, in a very powerful way?
Yeah, thanks. And let me first respond to the lady from AgriConnect. And I feel your pain. I know it's been very, very difficult, especially for small and medium businesses to get certified. Certification is a journey. And we've seen, there is need for investments, and I come back to
hopefully it's not a never-ending journey.
It's not a never-ending. It's a journey with a destination, but there needs to be investment. So there is an opportunity for investors. The same with the labs. We've seen a big gap. There is a big program that we implemented in the region, and we had to take samples to the US for analysis. So there is, and with that need, and I'm sure you could be talking about one of the labs in Kenya that we funded. We established a lab where, that can serve the industry. So there is need for resources. Final one on the budgets for food safety. There are budgets because there is a ministry that looks at food safety. They have officers. Is it enough? Is that ministry, are the bureaus of standards in the country supported sufficiently? They're not. So that is a gap. There's funding, but there's a gap. There's need to have more boots on the ground if they have to, survey, because there's need for surveillance. But if they have to do it effectively, there's need for additional funding.
Last point.
Last one. There are initiatives, regional initiatives. What he has just mentioned one, we are in one with him. There is a COMESA GFSI initiative that is going on. It's good for the players in the food industry here to learn about that and take advantage of those initiatives in the region.
Great. So, lot going on. Big question about how we join that up, how we actually make that work for people who really need that on the ground, small, medium enterprises to get scale. I love the fact that you've allowed me to move, and have quite an open sort of discussion. So I'm warning the next panel. Thank you very much. If you give a big round of applause. I never make it easy for them as a moderator, so they've done very well. And if I can invite the next panel up, Geeta Sethi, who's the advisor, at the Global Agricultural Practice of the World Bank, and Marco Warpires, the Director General of the World Vegetable Centre, and Jordan Day, who's the CEO of GrainPro, Brigitte Steyn, who's the Research Platform Manager at Microbials at UPL, Godfrey Miwamama, who's the Research and Development Director for CRM Artec.
Used to be a world free of poverty. Our mission statement means the World Bank's. It got revised to say a world free of poverty on a livable planet. And a livable planet means that our food systems, and we've heard about the system story throughout the morning, needs to be fixed. And fixing the food systems is about fixing food loss and waste. It has implications, again, at the integrated story, Sean, that you talked about, on greenhouse gas emissions, on trade balances, on farmers' incomes, on farmers' welfare, on environmental resources. And so a big agenda that we have been following in the institution has been on addressing losses and waste. And on the policy side, it's very interesting. I mean, why doesn't Toyota make 3 cars and throws one out? So what is so unique about the food sector that we are throwing 1/3 of our food out? And it has huge implications in terms of land usage, water usage, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's clearly addressing losses and waste, whether it is in terms of climate change or a mitigation agenda or a risk mitigation, etc., is a development agenda, a development challenge, because food simply seems to be disappearing. It is a hidden challenge because this food is unaccounted in terms of statistics, right? And we've looked now in 3 countries in Africa, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Kenya. And first, the numbers for sub-Saharan Africa, and you mentioned this in the morning, is the food insecurity here is about 61%, about. Food losses is, loss and waste is about 37%. Do the maths. And of course, in terms of the import bills, you're exactly right. 75 billion a year is just on food. When there is a very large amount of domestic production. And I'm going to say something that is very maybe controversial, but it needs to be said because it is true that one of our analysis on the policy side is food's not priced right. And when I say food's not priced right, is the fact that the food we are producing doesn't take into account the hidden costs, the cost on soil health, the cost on water usage, on environmental degradation, etc. And if food is priced right, it is going to be 2 times. We did an experiment for bananas in Kenya. The losses on bananas in Kenya, and Lucy was just here, is 47%. So it begs the question, why is Kenya not using ripening channels or ripening chambers? And the answer to that is because producers are going to lose money if they invest. And the reason they're going to lose money is because they need to get twice the amount that they are getting right now. This is a very concrete example right now coming out of Kenya. So I think this is a big policy dilemma for countries that if they price the food right, then what other income support or social protection programs need to be put in place that food still is affordable, not just food, not just caloric value, but nutritional value as you talked about. That's one. The second issue around the policies and why we are seeing such a large distortion has also to do in terms of access to credit, other infrastructure bottlenecks, investments in cold chains, and we heard about that in the morning. I mean, addressing losses and waste is a classic global public good agenda, because it has huge implications on GHGs. In Kenya, it's 21%, okay? In Rwanda, we are looking at 16% of global emissions coming out of losses and waste. And the economic value to these countries, in Rwanda, with the losses, is about 12% of Rwandan GDP. In Kenya, it's about 10%. Nigeria is 9%. These are big numbers. Right? So when you said it's a low-hanging fruit, absolutely. It just hasn't made it to the front pages. But now I think because of different kinds of crises, and crisis can be seen as an opportunity, it's beginning there. And then...
I mean, I love the way when I asked Khadija, what's the biggest challenge that you're sort of seeing? She said climate change. So we're seeing that come into that policy thing. Sorry, keep going.
No, so let me stop here, and then I can come back in.
So, I mean, Jordan, just coming to this pricing thing, and I'm going to jump around a bit, but, what we've heard, Geeta sort of mentioned a couple of things there. One is the incentives, getting the incentives right, and getting the pricing right. But, from a GrainPro perspective, I mean, are you seeing this sort of link between, one of the questions the gentleman here asked was, are we seeing the interests of the consumer and the interests of the farmer coming together? And, and just how do you really see that, and what's the focus? And as I said, I'll jump around a little bit.
No, thank you, Sean, and let me just endorse everything Geeta just said. I think you laid the framework for what we're addressing here, and sort of the scale and scope of the challenge, right, and the opportunity. And just briefly, GrainPro is involved in post-harvest storage. It's a hermetic or an organic form of storage. And we see our business as part of the broader effort to reduce food insecurity because we can help reduce post-harvest losses. So that's the play for us. That's our mission. That's our objective. And I think to the pricing question that Geeta raised, we see a similar phenomenon with farmers, right, who may not have the resources to invest in alternative storage or appropriate storage because they're making that same calculation, right? What's the return on that investment if they were to purchase a hermetic bag or store hermetically? So yeah, that has an impact. But I think what the opportunity is here is that there is a return on that investment, right, eventually, and there is value in having high quality, low aflatoxin grain, right, and there will be a market for that, but right now the market doesn't reimburse them for that investment.
And so, but from your side, what's it going to take to then really fast track that investment? Is it an innovation piece? Is it a financing piece? Is it a policy piece?
It's really around aggregating grain and linking that aggregated grain or any commodity to buyers, right? And it's that we need that innovation there. It's some sort of an entrepreneurial innovation. Safely storing the grain or the commodity is a really important component of that because it has to meet aflatoxin levels, right? It has to meet phytosanitary requirements. But there has to be a market for whatever the farmer is producing, and the market can be a regional market, it can be a national, or it can be an international market, but that's the key. There has to be that demand side.
Yeah, so it's creating those sort of backwards linkages. So there's an organizational piece to this, Marco. I mean, if I come to you, from looking at this, particularly with sort of perishables like in fruit and vegetables. I mean, it's taking both a holistic approach, looking at nutrition. This is about food nutrition security, not just food security, but it's also about taking a fully end-to-end system approach. Is that how you're also seeing it in terms of the key blockages that we have to unblock?
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, of course, vegetables, fruits, if you talk about post-harvest losses, this is a main point, right? Perishable commodities like vegetables and fruit. Just want to also quickly point out the policy issue. I think also in the previous panel we have been focusing a lot about export and the issues with food safety, right? But if you think of vegetables, fruits, there is not enough emphasis on producing safe, local vegetables and fruits for domestic markets, right? We see enormous problems with malnutrition. We see urbanization in Africa going like crazy. Look at Dar es Salaam here, it's growing with thousands of people a day. How are we going to nourish all these people, right? So our center puts a lot of emphasis on how we can produce vegetables safely and locally. And you have to have an end-to-end approach. Because if you talk about vegetables, it's like quick turnaround. I mean, you have to make sure that for a start you produce what you can sell and not try to sell what you happen to produce, right? So you have to know your market. You must make sure you can turn around things quickly. And then other technologies come into play like storage, processing. And there's one technology, if you give me the floor later, I want to talk about is seed, right? Because that's such an incredible, important entry point. But yes, end-to-end, know your demand, know where your bottlenecks in the supply side are, and work on policy issues. Like if you work on a safe produced vegetable and it ends up in a wet market where there's no way you can distinguish between what has been produced safely or not, we don't get anywhere. So you need municipality officers to come and help you ensure that you can distinguish between these products, and also that we have aggregation areas where farmer cooperatives can come together, store, and label.
You see a lot of focus on domestic markets because obviously fruit and vegetables, in East Africa and West Africa, there's been a lot of export-driven sort of agenda. But obviously,
well, I think if you think of Kenya, if you probably the policy emphasis is there on exporting to the European Union snow peas and French bean, right? But you would really like to see that, I'm not thinking out Kenya, but African countries in general, that their compacts show some evidence that the malnutrition issue is taken seriously, and that you think of how to produce fruit and vegetables in a safe manner for urban consumers in particular.
Yeah. Great. Come back, and I'll come back to you on the seed, because actually the innovation piece, Brigitte, I mean, you're working with microbials and that sort of thing, but for me, this innovation agenda and really building a dynamic innovation ecosystem, rather than just looking at individual bits, but taking a whole of innovation approach is going to be so important. But you're coming at it from the private sector side. You know, what are you hearing, and how do we respond to this innovation sort of driven agenda?
Well, thank you, Sean. Yes, I definitely agree innovation is the way to go. We've got so many challenges, and I once again want to reiterate breaking down boundaries, moving out of the silos, looking globally.
Breaking the silos, I'm liking that. This is my theme
breaking the
for
silos,
this session. Yeah.
moving out of that. But as a private sector company, a company that actually develops, researches, produces, manufactures and distributes products, traditionally agrochemical. Being a microbiologist, as you see, the NPP part, I think that the innovation is going to come from moving back to our roots, if I can call it that way, and looking at microbes and the role that microbes and biologicals and natural products can play in post-harvest disease suppression or post-harvest loss reduction. I mean, we all know about the traditional...
And for the audience, maybe if you help them, just what do you mean by sort of microbes in that sense?
Microbes, like in microbes. Let me give an example.
I deserved that, didn't I?
Microbes.
I sort of had that coming, yeah.
Let me give you an example. One of UPL's business units is DECO. DECO specializes in intelligent post-harvest products. One of the products that we have is a traditional one, QuickPhos. It's aluminium phosphine as a fumigant. But that is a traditional one. When I talk about biological and microbes, I talk about something like Argos. Argos is isolated from oranges, sweet oranges. It is a biological ingredient. Natural ingredient, not chemically synthesized in a lab. And another one is Nature Cover. It's once again a biological or natural product that contains polysaccharides, waxes, proteins. Going biological, going natural, going organic, in conjunction with the chemicals, not getting rid of the chemicals, but we've been doing chemicals for so many years. It is time to get the best of both worlds, chemical and biological, because food safety, I mean, it's no use exporting something that's got a dangerous chemical on it. Yeah. That's going to prevent us from exporting. It's not going to go into the countries. It's going to be a problem. So yes, that's what I mean with biological, integrating the best of both worlds.
Exactly, and I really like that. Yeah, it's not an either-or solution. It's actually taking the best of. I'm just going to quickly jump back, Marco, to your seed point. You know, because obviously from a UPL side, this is something. But I noticed, particularly when I was in Kenya and I was living there, it became a huge debate about live seeds with potatoes, for example, and it actually brought the whole potato sector to a standstill, and actually Kenya ran 4 separate sprints on seeds, capacity building, finance, and offtake, and then actually were able to unlock that, and Tanzania did the same in 6 months. Came to a standstill because of actually the seed issue, but that might not be the point you were going to make, but I would...
Yeah, well, thanks. So, yeah, I'll touch upon that probably as well, but I think when we think of post-harvest losses, people usually think about storage, processing, technology, but the seed itself can be a very good starting point. I think previous panel also pointed out that there are lots of issues with quality, so qualitative losses because of pest and disease issues, in particular in vegetables, right? So you have lesions, you have fruits that have all kinds of little holes. Your marketable value is going to tumble, right? So breeding for varieties that resist these pests and diseases also in climate change scenarios is extremely important and hardly done in Africa, honestly. And you can also think of storage pests that pop up after infestation in the field. For example, with mung bean, alder pulses, there's a little beetle, 3 to 5 millimeter, that larvae are going to destroy your beans if you're not careful. So resistance is one element there that can help. Then 2 more, if you like, very quickly. If you think of tomatoes running hundreds of kilometers along the road here, if you build in firmness through breeding, that can also help you tomato compounds up and down a bit, right? And yeah, then the other one would be processing. So we see lots of problems with gluts in tomato production. So one time there's enormous amount of tomato, the other season there's nothing. So if you could process that excess production, that would be good. But your variety needs to be appropriate for fresh market and processing market. That's not obvious either, but you can do it with breeding.
So it's taking that, so once again, that whole systems approach, it's looking at varieties that will sell. It's then looking at, do we have the standards in place to ensure the safety protocols? Because there's a big difference between processing a tomato and eating it raw on your plate as part of a salad. And so, just listening to this sort of the whole innovation piece and all of that. I mean, in terms of investment and research, it's going to be critical if we're going to use. Are you seeing enough evidence of this, that this is really, or could we do a lot better?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Just briefly about Savannah Circuit, we are a local manufacturer based in Nairobi, providing cold chain solutions for value chains and also management systems to make sure that we support the value chain with climate smart value addition equipment. Because again, there's no success in our food systems, again, if we cannot do agro-processing and there's no access to cold chain. So back to your question on investments and also partnerships.
Really low still in the Africa system in terms of development.
Definitely, it's quite on the low, but I think on the context of what we've been able to do is that realizing the importance of just bringing all hands on deck. That is from the private sector, small innovators, medium level SMEs, government as well, but also most importantly, the academia and the research world. Because again, with all this very good work that is done from our institutions, from our laboratories, if it's not able to make it to the mainstream, and the mainstream is where now you have the private sector coming in and deploying this knowledge in form of a product that would fit the market, then that's the only way we can be able to catalyze and bring change in regards to breaking these different silos. If information and investments are accessible point by point, and it's everybody coming together in whatever capacity and making sure this works.
And are you seeing, I mean, we mentioned there were a couple of references to incentives early on, because I find if you take, do you see those incentives being built in? Is there profitability for different players through that system with, say, cold storage is often at the end of the system?
Pretty much there's still a lot of work to do on that front because a lot of these value chains are very lean margins. So any new innovation or new introduction of something different, then it creates a shift. Whether it is positive, but then what is the cost of acquiring this goodness that we want in the end? So that's why, again, it is important to make sure that we are accountable in starting testing first what would work with the smallholder farmers, cooperatives, and all the actors across the supply chain, and making sure that, from the learnings that we're able to scale this. And for this, I think we can be more accountable in making sure that we realize what we want in the end.
And just from a business perspective, are you seeing this as something that the finance institutions are responding to, in the sense that they're seeing this as something that de-risks the investment, which will then help investment and minimize the cost? Mm-hmm. Because why I say that is I'm seeing that finance institutions are seeing this as a risk at the moment. And so unless we can figure out and demonstrate actively how this actually helps to de-risk, then finance costs will stay high. They won't come down, which is a killer here in the Africa context, the cost of capital.
Yeah, definitely. And all the efforts put in will not be able to actualize. And that's why I think there's still a lot of work, especially in the context where we are well aware, even if we bring in cold chain mostly is supporting, again, the lean margin, the smallholder farmers. But then there has to be an ecosystem where we could have the development partners maybe de-risking the first front, proving data on that on the front of what would work with these people. Then this data could further be adopted by the financial institutions, because I think there's a lot of staying away until we have proof, which again is hindering everyone's progress to achieving food safety.
Okay, so how do we innovate for scale and then show right from the beginning some of these sort of de-risking mechanisms can have a sort of end-to-end sort of thing? Godfrey, from the research side, I mean, are you seeing you know, that this sort of integrated systems thinking is coming in, or is it still, you know, are you still seeing it as quite siloed? Do you think, you know, we in that?
Thank you very much, sir. Really, I don't see much the issue of integration, and really because of the nature of the industry itself, the agricultural industry in Tanzania, let's say, for example, the innovations which are to be used for smallholder farmers, really they have what we call small utilization level. For example, agricultural machineries, most of them, they are used within 2 months in a year. So the rest of 10 months, they remain almost idle. So that may be among the issues which really hinder the interest of people to invest into agricultural investment, especially in those machinery side. So still, there are some efforts which really need to be done so as to make the area attractive. For example, the innovations that really are multi-crop, processing machines, multi-crop processing machines, or multi-operational technologies, or seasonal mapping, if the seasons are mapped within the countries or within the destinations, then at least there shall come a situation in which the industry becomes reliable, and at that time it is easy now to integrate with the other actors within the industry.
And are you seeing, are you also, I mean, the question I want to now sort of pick up a bit comes back to the first panel around trade a little bit. We've talked about innovation, but, you know, with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, are you seeing the kind of cross-border work that's being done at a sort of research and development level to really expand this from, you know, from what you're seeing?
Yeah, really, I see that there is a good hope for cross-border integration for the technologies. For example, Tanzania and Kenya, but other countries as well. So there is at least a brighter future, which is really expected.
Mm.
Yeah.
Marco, yeah.
Can I turn it around in terms of trade and see how we can do something about import, right? So African continent spends like $500 million on imported tomato products, right? So in the past, a lot of emphasis has been on setting quite large processing plants for tomato. I think some success in East Africa, but in West Africa, very mitigated success there with plants that require hundreds or even more than 1,000 metric tons per day to turn, right? So we have quite a nice success story in Kano with the Tomato Joss company, where relatively small, nimble processing equipment is used, dual purpose tomato. A lot of social media to market that, and a lot of women are also involved in this. So nimble is probably more beautiful than very large processing plants, in particular when you think of tomato. And I think we're starting to see that, investing in processing equipment that's not huge, but yeah, and then you have more flexibility also, a lot more flexibility.
But can I just take that one step further, because I'm not sure. Is nimble good if you're trying to create cross-border agendas? Because I can see nimble being very good if you're just trying to create a localized.
If you can multiply that experience, why not? And again, this is for a domestic market in particular, right? And we have just seen that with these big tomato processing plants, we haven't seen real success. Right? Mm. Maybe here, there's one example in East Africa.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. I want to react on a couple of things that I've heard. Let me start on the processing. What we've seen, and it links a little bit on the de-risking as well, in terms of access to finance. On processing, what one sees is if there are multiple actors or corporates have different parts of the value chain, it's very hard, because it's very hard as a system to reduce losses and waste, right? and therefore have the right incentives. Certain companies who are across the entire value chain, for example, Olam with tomato, you actually see investments being made in a way that reduces losses, has implications on the trade balances, but also on the farmer's income. So that's one. And some of the things we've been thinking is, should we then just work with these corporates as a starting point? Because something needs to break. Some results need to happen, which we are not getting at the moment, and really move this. The second point I wanted to make very quickly is, we've talked a lot on the losses side. There's a huge waste, including in Africa. Average waste on an African household, capitals, urban areas, is 72 kilos per capita annually, okay? That also is going somewhere in terms of landfill without having a circularity built in. Again, the policy distortion or a need for intervention. And the last point that I'd like to make is, you know, I think somebody else made that point as well in the earlier panel, that global numbers don't mean much. And it's exactly right, that interventions in terms of, we know the technologies, they're out there, maybe in a form of boutiques. We know the agro-logistics need to improve. We know the storage, processing, etc. But unless and until we do not, we don't understand what is happening across commodities and geographies, to really then have very tailored interventions, it's not going to work. And just bear with me and indulge me. One example, we looked at tomatoes in two countries, Rwanda and Nigeria, okay? And where to intervene to have the biggest impact to consumers was very different points. In Nigeria, it was intervention needed at the transport and processing, which allowed prices, tomatoes being a proxy for perishables, fruits and vegetables, so nutrition security. Prices, by addressing losses and waste, reducing it by 50%, and we're talking about 76% loss in tomatoes in Rwanda, and I think 49% or the other way around in Nigeria. But in Nigeria, the intervention had to happen at the transport and processing, and that allowed prices to come down by 20%, so increase the affordability of nutrition. And in Rwanda, the intervention had to happen at the farm level. Now, lots of times we broadly say storage, processing, and we go with this wholesale. It doesn't work. Thanks.
No, I think it's a really important point. I just wanted to pick up on that because actually, you know, it's like the cold storage piece. Rwanda, when they actually looked at cold storage, it was actually UPL who were trying to look at cold storage in Rwanda, and actually the issue wasn't cold storage, wasn't facilitation, it was actually the price of electricity. And this is, you know, now where you're seeing a lot of renewables coming in to sort of break that with the price coming down. But it was an electricity issue that was then was the bottleneck for a whole cold storage value chain, and the cost of electricity, which then Rwanda then subsequently were able to address. But let me start. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on that point, on access to cold chain is, again, could be an element of access to energy and cost of electricity, because right now, for example, it's quite high. And that's why it is important to keep pushing for green technologies at work. And most importantly, even as we deploy, you know, these solutions, like for example, in our case at Savannah Circuit, we've modularized these different chillers that in a way that you could place them on a motorbike for making sure that you are able to access farm gates, even with 100 liters of milk.
I love
you're
that.
able to
that
take
vision.
it to the next
sort of
level.
cold storage chain on a motorbike. Yeah, it's yeah. Keep going.
Yes, because the point is to make sure, first of all, for perishable, highly perishable like dairy, it has fast point of cooling at least within 2 hours. But then again, the challenge comes in, the production at farm level is so low to deploy a massive cold chain system. Then again, brings the element again even on product design and innovation that in a way it relates with the communities, build a business around it, and most importantly, make sure that the produce is making it to the every point of the supply chain in a safe way and also nutritious, and at the same time, giving back money in the pockets of the various farmers.
Can I ask you, and anyone can pick this up, I mean, actually what I took from what you were just saying, Geeta, is this idea, if I sort of put together some of what you're saying, is this idea which Tanzania, actually, Sagkot, the gentleman there from Sagkot, reminded me that this is happening, is this idea of commodity compacts, that we need to take a whole of commodity approach, because what is needed for different types of grain is very different. If you're working in soy, which could have a huge impact, you've got to go from the seed production through horticulture, you know, same thing. Is there a role for these commodity compacts to really create the cross incentives that will unlock safety and food and safety and phytosanitary standards?
Absolutely. Let me take one example, rice. You know, if one looks at 70% of emissions from the food sector is essentially livestock, rice, and losses and waste, okay? So if we take rice, rather than, and it also has implications on access to finance, the financiers want bankable projects. We hear that all the time, with some return. So one of the areas that we've been thinking a lot about is low emission rice. So it's a commodity story. It suddenly looks, it's a suddenly bottom line of $40 billion. It's not about 5 million or 10 million or, you know, or so on and so forth. And it encompasses, you know, at least 12 to 15 countries. And then one can actually go in terms of extension services. So there's a public-private partnership there, in terms of private financiers, in terms of private sector, including markets, right? So I'm a big fan of commodity-specific clusters.
Yeah, because then you take, it's not just a value chain, it's the whole,
exactly,
the whole entirety of what they're doing. If you're fruit and vegetables, then you're going into sort of dried fruit and vegetables and, you know, right through to, so Marco, come in. And then, so hands up for anyone. Don't give them the microphone. I will come down to them with the microphone.
Just to add to that, I think we often think in terms of vegetable business networks, because so many vegetables, right? But the whole trick is really to make things click in terms of supply, demand, and policy. And yeah, so how to scale that is another question, this type of experience.
Okay, I'm being told by the organisers I have to wrap up, so I'm going to take 2 questions. I'm going to run up to the gentleman at the back. No, don't give them the microphone. Don't give them the microphone. I learned my lesson from this very, very passionate woman here. Right, sir, your name. Stand up.
Thank you very much. My name is Abakar Kejoji from WWF. Yeah, my question is on a supply chain, particularly with horticulture crops. We know the big challenge is the perishability of these crops, and particularly when they are taken from production to the market. They are traveling miles, we are crossing different tens of checks and whatever. So is there a way of increasing utilization of renewable energy, like solar, along the supply chain, from the production to the like wholesale? Take example of a potato. If you go to the local market there, potato are sold while the vehicle is standing there for 3 days, and you can imagine how much losses happen in that kind of way. So,
okay.
Yes. So renewable energy, how can we really utilize and increase utilization of that renewable energy?
Okay, so Emma Stella will definitely sort of pick up on that, I think. Right, one more question. Sir, right, over to you. And I need one woman. No, stand up. Right, what's your name?
Ernest Asiedu. No, I'm not giving you the mic. Well, what I'm saying, what to say is that also there is technology that abounds. I'm coming from the research background. So we need to build the capacity of farmers, because all these raw materials and the produce are coming from the farmers. And there are practices. I mean, we don't take mix, for example. I mean, the aflatoxins start being from the soil. I mean, how they're supposed. Your question for the panel is? It's not a question, it's a contribution. Okay. So the practices that will lead to production of aflatoxin, infection of the Aspergillus flavus, which is the fungus that causes the aflatoxin.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so it starts at the farm level. At the end of the day, these practices absolutely start at the farm level. Okay, so we had a question there around renewables starting at the farm level. Quick sweep across you all, since I'm being given the nod by the organisers that we're at time, and I promised I would finish on time. So I'll go down, actually I'll start with you up this end, so because of the renewable question, and I want to start with a woman, so it makes sense, and we'll do a sweep down the panel this way.
Yeah, so renewable energy is not only giving us access to make sure that we are able to power our agri-systems, but also most importantly, it is also giving us, as a young continent as we are, and with energy deficiencies and problems, I think it also gives us a chance to make sure that we are able to cut greenhouse emissions, gases, from even the lowest point of the supply chain, and making sure that route to market does not contribute so much CO2 to our environment. But also, most importantly, it also gives us room to continually innovate because, I mean, if you can have access to power, then you can have more and more product, agri-processing, even in nimble forms, will still be accessible because we'll be able to power our small agri-processing facilities even as we look forward to scaling.
And so in 30 seconds, what's your key takeaway from today? Thank you for that answer, it was great. So what's your key takeaway for today? What's your homework for Monday? What are you going to be doing next week, Monday, based on this discussion?
Well, based on this conversation, is just looking at what we are doing from a very holistic point that beyond the small scale level, we have a responsibility to create proper impact by making sure that the solutions that we have are accessible, they are affordable, and they are able to improve livelihoods and nutrition of the communities that we work with.
Brilliant. Spot on. I like that. Godfrey, over to you.
Yeah, really, what I'm thinking of by, let's say, the week to come is simply to come with the appropriate technologies that can really have solutions to smallholder farmers in terms of multi-crop operation and in terms of multi-crop processing. So as we really increase utilization level of the technologies, and at the end of the day, to make the investment viable to most of entrepreneurs into agricultural production.
Yeah, no, there's got to be an incentive and there's got to be a value add to build that sort of spirit of entrepreneurship. Marco.
Thanks, Sean. I think the whole area of post-harvest food safety, if you come to perishables, is incredibly complex, right? So to me, we need
to
have
you have 30
much more
seconds to simplify it.
Innovation and collective action. And if we can take 3 areas, innovative and collective action around seed, around biocontrol, biopesticides, and about end-to-end approaches to make things work really in reality.
Brilliant. So innovative collective action, but specifically, with that sort of, that 3-level focus. Yeah. Geeta.
Thank you, Sean. My closing thoughts are that the 21st century farming cannot be a single business enterprise. The 21st century farmer, he or she will have 3 revenue streams: producing food, renewables, and ecosystem services.
So it's saying, I mean, a lot of what the gentleman was saying when he stood up, that this is, taking a whole of society approach, but actually bringing that right down to the farm level and helping them to make it work, because that's where this starts. That's, it starts at the farm level, making sure the farmers have the capacity to actually do this. Brigitte.
Short and sweet from my side. You cannot apply what
You've got to follow the rule of 3. They've all come up with 3 things. So
you cannot apply what you do not have access to, and you cannot apply what you don't.
Say that again. You cannot. Yeah.
You cannot apply what you do not have access to, and you cannot apply what you do not understand.
Right.
Training.
Very good.
Training.
So complex though it is, to Marco's point, you can actually, there is a simplicity to how you address this. Last but not least.
overall, what we're all in this room to address, right, is hunger and poverty, right? And how do we find solutions to address hunger and poverty? SDG 1, SDG 2, SDG 12.3, reduce post-harvest losses. That's key. It's fundamental for us to be able to make progress there. And there are solutions, right? Whether they're biological, whether they're chemical, whether they're airtight storage. Trade is a component of this, but it's not everything, right? There are households that are growing crops for their own consumption, and they too are, and they're not going to trade those beyond potentially a regional market, and certainly not an international market, but they need solutions. And so we need to give, our farming families tools to address those post-harvest losses. And I think, going back to Geeta's initial point, if we can drive 27% post-harvest losses down to less than 5%, we're going to make real progress on hunger and food insecurity. And that's why we're all here, right? And so let's continue to focus on that. I think storage is a critical component of that, and it's nice to see that there's a number of options now.
I like it, and just bringing this down to earth. I mean, it is, at the end of the day, this is a fundamental human right in terms of knowing that we can access food, but in a way that is safe and secure. That's what this really just comes down to. And if we can't have that and the dignity of what that means, but address the complexity of that challenge in a sort of simplistic but very powerful way, I think then we have lost our way a little bit. This is such a fundamental issue in terms of getting food safety right at scale that benefits everyone in the African context, that I cannot stress the importance and the transformative nature of what this has done. But it requires a whole of systems approach. It requires breaking the silos. It requires really getting the knowledge base out there to address that. And it's going to require real committed leadership. And I'm looking at every one of you in the room here, because if you've sat here for 2 hours and listened to what has been a terrific set of panels, it's because you're committed to this. So what is it that you can do Monday morning that will have a major, powerful influence? Every one of you sitting here are not some passive observer to this conversation. You are actively engaged, and it's going to require all of us to really go out and drive this agenda to make it work. Thank you to the panel and for bringing this to life and creating some dynamism and energy. So, no, well done. One more round of applause. That was very weak. Come on. That was, Thank you, everybody. If I